My husband disappeared 14 months ago, or so everyone believed. I want to be clear about something before I tell you what happened. I am not a dramatic woman. I have never been the kind of person who raises her voice at the dinner table or cries at commercials or calls her friends to talk about her feelings at 11 o'clock at night. I am 63 years old. I taught fourth grade for 31 years. I know how to keep things orderly. I know how to stay calm when everything around me is falling apart. So when I tell you what I saw last Tuesday morning at the post office on Clearwater Road, I need you to understand that I did not imagine it. I did not confuse him with someone else. I know my husband's walk. I know the way he holds his left shoulder slightly higher than his right. I know the small scar behind his ear from a fishing accident in 1987. I know him the way you know a house you have lived in for 38 years, every creak, every corner, every place where the light falls strange in the afternoon. I know him, and he was standing 12 feet away from me, very much alive, dropping a thick envelope into the outgoing mail slot. Let me start from the beginning, because this story does not make sense unless you understand what the 14 months before that Tuesday looked like. My husband's name is Gerald. We met when I was 24 and he was 27, at a church potluck dinner in Roanoke, Virginia. He brought a casserole his mother had made and tried to take credit for it, and I called him out in front of everyone, and he laughed so hard he nearly choked. We were married 11 months later. We raised 2 children in a yellow house on Birchwood Lane. We argued about money and vacations and whose turn it was to call the plumber. We built a life the way most people do, slowly, imperfectly, with a lot of ordinary Tuesdays in between. Then one Thursday in December, 14 months ago, Gerald went out for his morning walk and did not come back. His walking shoes were found near the bank of Shepherd Creek, about 2 miles from our house. His jacket was there too, folded neatly over a rock, which the police said later was unusual. His phone was in the jacket pocket, turned off. There was no note. There was no sign of a struggle. There was simply nothing. A pair of shoes, a folded jacket, and a silence that moved into my house and sat down and never left. The sheriff's department searched for 4 days. They dragged part of the creek. They interviewed neighbors, checked his credit cards, called every person in his phone. His car was still in our driveway. His wallet was on the nightstand, which I kept being asked about because apparently a man does not walk away from his wallet if he is walking away voluntarily. They told me that more than once. After 6 weeks, with no body and no evidence of foul play, the investigation went cold. A detective named Paulson sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee he barely touched and told me, very gently, that sometimes people make choices that their families do not understand and cannot predict. He did not use the word suicide. He did not use the word runaway. He used the phrase unknown circumstances 4 separate times in 20 minutes. And I counted because counting things is how I manage when I feel like I am about to come apart at the seams. My daughter, whose name is Patricia, flew in from Portland and stayed for 3 weeks. My son, whose name is Daniel, came for the first week and then returned to his family in Columbus because his wife was pregnant and due in February, and there was nothing more he could do standing in my kitchen, looking helpless. Patricia cried a great deal. I held her and told her we would be all right. I believed it when I said it, mostly. I filed the missing persons report. I notified the bank. I called Gerald's brother in Tucson, who said very little and sounded, I thought, strangely unsurprised. I filed the paperwork to begin the legal process of having Gerald declared dead in absentia, which in Virginia requires a waiting period of 5 years, unless there is sufficient evidence to shorten it. 5 years. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. 5 years of not knowing. 5 years of his coffee mug still in the cabinet. 5 years of reaching to the right side of the bed in the dark and finding nothing there. I went back to work in January. I had 6 months left before my planned retirement, and I decided finishing was better than stopping in the middle. My students were 9 years old, and they were kind in the way that 9-year-olds are kind, which is to say completely and without any awareness that they are doing it. A boy named Marcus brought me a drawing of a rainbow every Friday for 2 months. I kept all of them. I retired in June. I planted a garden I did not particularly want. I called Patricia every Sunday. I went to the grief support group at the Methodist Church on Route 11 for 7 weeks and then stopped going because it was specifically for people who had lost someone to death. And my situation was different, and I could not explain the difference without seeing pity on people's faces that was somehow worse than the grief itself. I was managing, that is the best word for it. I was not healed, and I was not happy, and I was not moving on in any way that felt real, but I was managing. And then it was a Tuesday in February, 14 months after Gerald disappeared, and I went to the post office to mail Patricia's birthday package, and I saw my husband. He was wearing a gray canvas jacket I did not recognize. His hair was shorter, and he had grown a beard, which Gerald had never worn in 38 years of marriage, because he said beards made men look like they were hiding something, which I have thought about many times since that morning. He was thinner. He was standing with his back partially to me, but I could see his profile. I could see the way he shifted his weight to his right leg when he stood still, the small habit I had watched for decades. I dropped Patricia's package. Someone near me said, "Oh, are you all right?" And I could not answer because I was watching Gerald pull his hand back from the mail slot and turn slightly, and I saw his face clearly for just a moment before he looked down and walked toward the door. I followed him. I am not sure I made a decision to follow him. I think my legs simply moved and the rest of me came along. I went through the post office door 20 seconds behind him and stepped out into the cold and watched him walk across the parking lot to a dark green pickup truck I had never seen. He did not look back. He got in the truck, and then he drove away. I stood in the parking lot in the February cold without my coat because I had left it inside with Patricia's package, and I wrote down the license plate number on the back of my hand with a pen I found in my pocket. My hand was shaking. The ink smeared a little on the curve of my thumb. I pressed my other hand over it to hold the letters still while the green truck turned onto Clearwater Road and disappeared. I went back inside. I picked up Patricia's package. I paid for the postage. The woman behind the counter asked me twice if I was sure I was all right, and I said yes, both times. I drove home. I sat in my driveway for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because I watched the clock on the dashboard and I needed something to focus on that was not the thing I had just seen. Then I went inside and I called my son. Daniel answered on the third ring. I could hear his daughter, who was just over a year old now, making noise in the background. I told him what I had seen. I told him the license plate number. I told him about the beard and the gray jacket and the green truck. I described the way Gerald had dropped the envelope in the outgoing slot, the way he had shifted his weight, the way he had not looked back. There was a silence on the other end of the line that lasted long enough that I said, "Daniel, are you still there?" And my son said, "Mom, I need to tell you something." He had known for 4 months. I want you to understand what 4 months means. 4 months ago was October. In October, I had driven to Columbus to visit Daniel and his wife and meet my new granddaughter, who was 8 months old and had Gerald's eyes, which made me cry in the bathroom for a few minutes before I came back out and held her and told myself it was a blessing to see him in her. I had sat in Daniel's kitchen and eaten the dinner his wife cooked and talked about the holiday plans, and said, as I always said when I left, that I wished their father could have known this baby. And Daniel had known. For 4 months, he had known, and he had looked at me across that kitchen table, and he had said nothing. What Daniel told me, in a voice that kept breaking in ways I had never heard from him before, was this. Gerald had contacted him the previous October, 6 days before my visit. Gerald was alive and living in a town called Millhaven, about 240 miles from our house, under a different name. He had a woman there. He had been with her for over 2 years, which meant the relationship had begun more than a year before he disappeared. He had staged the scene at Shepherd Creek. He had planned it. He had wanted, Daniel said, to start over. He had felt, Daniel said, and here my son's voice went very quiet, that he had made a mistake. That our life, the yellow house, the 38 years, the grandchildren he would never hold, that all of it had been a mistake. Gerald had asked Daniel not to tell me. Gerald had said it would be kinder. Gerald had said I was strong enough to move on and that knowing the truth would only cause more pain. And Daniel, my son, who I had held in my arms and raised and loved and driven to Columbus to see in October, Daniel had decided that his father was right. I did not yell. I am not a woman who yells. I told Daniel that I needed to end the call and that we would speak again when I was ready and that I needed him to understand that what he had done was not kindness and it was not protection and he should not mistake one for the other. Then I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I thought about the grief support group at the Methodist Church and the people there who had lost someone and knew exactly what they had lost. I thought about the detective named Paulson and his phrase, unknown circumstances, and how he had been more honest with me than my own son. I thought about the birthday package I had just mailed to Patricia, who did not know, who had cried for her father in my arms, who deserved to know the truth about why she was crying. I thought about Gerald saying our life had been a mistake. I thought about what it means to call 38 years a mistake, whether that is something a person is allowed to decide alone, after the fact, from 240 miles away under a different name. I decided it was not. I called a woman I know named Roberta, who had gone through a divorce 12 years ago and come out the other side with the name of a very good attorney. I wrote the attorney's name and number on the notepad by my phone, the same notepad where I had written grocery lists and dentist appointments and Christmas card addresses for 20 years. Then I called the attorney's office and made an appointment for Thursday morning. Then I did one more thing. The license plate number on the back of my hand. I had copied it to paper when I got home, carefully, before the ink could fade any further. I knew I could not run a plate myself, but I knew someone who could point me in the right direction. My neighbor's husband had retired from the county sheriff's office 3 years ago. I walked next door in the cold, without my coat again, because I had apparently stopped remembering my coat, and I knocked on their door, and when he answered, I told him what had happened and showed him the number on the paper. He made 2 phone calls. It took 40 minutes. The truck was registered to a Gerald Raymond Marsh in Millhaven, North Carolina. Gerald's middle name is Raymond. His mother's maiden name was Marsh. He had not even tried very hard to disappear. I want to tell you about the drive to Millhaven because I think it matters. I drove down on a Saturday morning, 2 weeks after I saw him at the post office. I did not tell Daniel I was going. I had spoken to Daniel once in those 2 weeks, briefly, and I had told him that I loved him and that what he had done had hurt me in a way I was still measuring and that I was not ready to talk about it yet. He had cried. I had waited for him to finish and then said goodbye. I had spoken to Patricia. That conversation was harder. She did not cry the way Daniel had cried, with guilt and remorse. She cried with grief, pure and clean, because the version of her father she had mourned and missed and loved was not the version that existed. That kind of grief does not go away quickly. I know that. I stayed on the phone with her for almost 2 hours and I told her everything I knew and I did not try to soften it because she deserved not to have it softened. Millhaven is a small town. It took me less than an hour to find the address associated with the truck registration. Gerald had not been subtle. The house was a pale blue ranch on a street called Orchard Way with a birch tree in the front yard and a welcome mat that said, "Home." There was a flower bed along the front walk that someone had planted with winter pansies, purple and yellow, and they were very pretty, and I stood at the edge of the driveway and looked at them for a moment. Then I walked to the front door and knocked. A woman answered. She was perhaps 50, with dark hair going gray at the temples and a guarded expression that shifted when she looked at me, the way an expression shifts when a person sees something they have been afraid of arriving. She knew who I was. I could see it immediately. She had known I existed. She had simply, I imagine, hoped I would not become real in this particular way. I said, "My name is Margaret. I believe my husband is here." She started to say something. Then Gerald appeared behind her in the hallway. He looked older. He looked, I thought, smaller than I remembered, though he was the same height he had always been. He was wearing a flannel shirt I had never seen, and he had that beard, and he looked at me for a long moment with an expression I recognized after 38 years. It was the expression he wore when he had done something he knew was wrong and had been waiting, without admitting it, to be caught. I did not go inside. I stood on the welcome mat that said, "Home," and I told Gerald 3 things. First, that I had retained an attorney and that the 5-year waiting period for a declaration of death in absentia was no longer the timeline we were operating on because he was clearly alive and present, and that changed the legal situation considerably. Second, that the 2 joint accounts he believed were still frozen, pending his legal status, had been reorganized on the advice of my attorney, and that the contents of those accounts, which included 31 years of our combined savings, were being handled accordingly. Third, that I would be requiring a formal divorce proceeding on my terms and my timeline, and that if he chose to cooperate, it would go smoothly. And if he chose not to cooperate, I had a great deal of patience and an attorney who had made much more complicated situations go the right direction. Gerald said my name once. I do not know if he meant it as a question or an apology or something else. It did not matter. The woman in the doorway had gone very still. I looked at her once, directly, and I did not say anything to her, because she was not the person I had driven 240 miles to speak to. Whatever she had been told about Gerald's previous life was her own business to sort through. That was between her and the man she had chosen. I was done sorting things on Gerald's behalf. I walked back to my car. I drove to a diner 3 miles outside of Millhaven and ordered coffee and eggs and sat in a corner booth and watched the Saturday morning people come and go. A family with 3 small children sat nearby, and the youngest, a little girl of about 4, waved at me from her high chair, and I waved back. I felt, sitting there with my coffee, something I had not expected to feel. Not relief, exactly. Not happiness. Something quieter than either of those things, a sense of the floor being solid under my feet again, a sense of knowing finally the exact size and shape of what I was dealing with. I had been managing in the dark for 14 months. Now I had the lights on. The legal process took 8 months. Gerald did not cooperate fully in the beginning, and then he did, because my attorney is very good at her job and because the alternative was considerably worse for him. Patricia flew in twice during that period. Daniel drove down once in the spring, and we sat in my backyard for 3 hours and had the conversation we needed to have. It was not easy. I want to be honest about that. He is my son. He made a terrible choice, and it hurt me. And I also know that Gerald had pressured him, and that Daniel had been trying in his misguided and insufficient way to protect everyone at once, and had ended up protecting no one. I am not finished being hurt by it. I am also not finished loving him. Both of those things are true at the same time, and I have learned to hold them both. I sold the house on Birchwood Lane in August. I had thought I would not be able to do it. And then I walked through each room one final time and I realized the house I was grieving was not the one I was standing in. The house I had loved had been built out of something that turned out to be false in its foundations. I could not fix the foundations. I could only decide what I wanted to build next. I bought a smaller house, a white one with a good kitchen and a porch that faces east, in a town 40 miles away where I did not carry the weight of every neighbor's sympathy. I planted a garden. I actually wanted this time tomatoes and basil and 2 rose bushes, dark red, the kind my mother grew. I returned to the things I had let go of during the years of managing the house and the marriage, and everyone's comfort. I started painting again. Watercolors. Badly and happily. I joined a book club where no one knows my history unless I choose to tell it. Patricia calls me twice a week now. She is doing better than I expected, which is to say she is doing the slow and real work of rearranging who her father is in her understanding of her own history. That work does not have a finish line. I know that. I do not rush her. I think sometimes about the day at the post office, about the envelope Gerald dropped in the outgoing mail slot, thick and deliberate. I do not know who it was addressed to, and I realized at some point that I did not need to know. Whatever life he was building in that pale blue house on Orchard Way, under the name Gerald Raymond Marsh, with the winter pansies in the flower bed, that was his to manage now. I had spent 38 years building something with a man who had decided, privately and without telling me, that he wanted to be somewhere else. I could not change that. I could not go back and unmake the 38 years, nor would I want to, because they contained Patricia and Daniel, and 1,000 Tuesday mornings that were real and good and mine, regardless of what he had decided they meant. What I could do, what I did, was pick up Patricia's birthday package from the post office floor, mail it at the counter, drive home, and start making different decisions than the ones I had been making when I thought I had no choices. I have been in my new house for 7 months now. This morning I had coffee on the east-facing porch and watched the sun come up over the neighbor's oak tree, and the light was the particular color it gets in late September, pale gold and thin, the kind of light that makes ordinary things look like they were painted. I thought about Gerald once, briefly, the way I sometimes do, not with anger, mostly, with something more like the feeling you get when you drive past a road you used to take and notice that you don't miss it the way you thought you would. I am 63 years old. I have a white house and a garden with dark red roses and a book club on Thursday evenings. I have a granddaughter in Columbus with Gerald's eyes, who I am going to spoil appropriately and love without complication. I have a daughter in Portland who calls me twice a week and tells me about her life. I have myself, which turns out to be enough. It turns out to have always been enough. I just needed the lights on to see it.